Hello, CHRISTUS family, and welcome to our panel discussion this month. As we continue our learning about racial justice, many individuals have been asking me about, Marcos, what is systemic racism? What does it mean? Therefore, we have put together a great panel to discuss just that. With us, we have Dr. Tiffany Egby, and she is the Program Director for Physician Development at CHRISTUS Good Shepherd Health System in Northeast Texas. We also have Crystal Kohanke. Crystal is our Vice President for Human Resources at CHRISTUS Santa Rosa Health System, as well as CHRISTUS Spawn Health System in South Texas. And we also have Roy Alston. He's our System Vice President for Security here in Irving. So the three of you, thank you so much for joining this panel and for increasing our knowledge as we continue this journey of what systemic racism is and is not, but also how it affects our community, which is what we're here to discuss. So I have some questions that I've come up for you guys to consider. And for ease of listening, we're going to split this into 10 to 12-minute sessions so individuals can watch it, part one, and then come back and finish watching part two as time permits. So I already said your names and your titles. So if you wouldn't mind, please share with us a little bit about yourself. And just anyone can start.
I'll start. I'm Dr. Tiffany Egby. I am the Program Director for the Internal Medicine Residency here, CHRISTUS Good Shepherd, also a hospitalist, also a mom, have a skinny 16-year-old that's grown 4 inches and decided that he wants to have an afro because all of the men in our family are bald. And I have a 12-year-old girl, and we live here in Longview, Texas.
Great, thank you.
Well, I'll go next. I'm Crystal Kohanke, and I'm the Vice President of HR for South Texas. I've been privileged to be with CHRISTUS for almost 9 years, and I am also a mom. I have a 29-year-old who is serving our country in the Air Force. He's in South Carolina. And I have a 17-year-old who is about to be a senior, both boys, and just adore them, love them. They keep me challenged. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to share with all of you.
Thank you. Roy.
All righty, my name is Dr. Roy E. Alston. I serve as your Vice President of Security for the system here in the Irving office. I am a dad. I have 2 girls. One is 26. She's a pilot in the Air Force. She's an Air Force Academy graduate. And I have a little one. She's 13. She'll be 13 on Saturday. And she wants to be President of the United States. She is, so she says, I want to go to Harvard undergrad and Harvard Law School. And let's hope for lots of scholarships or something.
Got it all mapped out.
Got it all mapped out. She said, I want to be a community activist, and then I want to be this, and I want to be that, and I want to be President of the United States. I said, well, you keep talking like that, and then we will all be seeing that. So yeah, I'm happy to be with you today.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to have you all. So I feel like I have to share a little bit of myself too, since you guys went there. So I'm also a dad, of course. That's kind of our most important job, if you will. I have 2, a boy and a girl. My son is in Gainesville, Florida right now. He's a physical therapist, loving life, just got married 4 months ago. And my daughter just finished her master's in social work, and she's interviewing right now for a ton of jobs. We'll see what comes through. And she's married as well, and was married just celebrated 1 year. So they're definitely the apple of my eye, and keep me still busy. I think once a dad, you'll never stop being one. So, all right, so let's get right to it. What is systemic racism? And I think, Roy, if you don't mind, I would like for you to take that first, and then you guys can comment on it. But what is systemic racism? And Roy, I'm calling you, particularly your background, your professional background, which you can explain.
Oh, absolutely. So before I became Vice President of Security for CHRISTUS Health, I'm a retired Dallas police officer. So this time and place, my experience as a retired police officer, my experience as a police officer really kind of highlights some of the things that have happened that I've seen that I can kind of bring to bear on some of this conversation. So the question is, what is systemic racism? it's a very complex, it's kind of a really, we know what it is, but we experience it, but it really has a complex definition. It's an interaction between culture and policy and current institutions that really hold people of color down, right? Prevents them from fully enjoying all that's available in life in America. System and structures that have processes and procedures that really put people of color at disadvantage is what it is. And some of these things are blatantly intentional, and some of them are just consequence of poor decision making and being uninformed. And that's why it's probably so important now that we start talking about these, so we can go back and look at some of the things, some of the decisions that have been made that 20 years ago we didn't believe impacted people negatively, that we can now look at with a fresh eye and say, that does put people at a disadvantage, and we need to fix that.
That's true.
Can you guys add to that definition from your own experience too?
From my own experience, well, so I'm gonna tell you, I grew up very poor in Long Island, New York. I will tell you, my neighborhood, we didn't know we were poor because everybody was poor. But what I didn't know then was we were victims of what we call redlining. And redlining is a process that was used by the banks to determine where monies would be spent on families buying homes. And in communities that were redlined, where there were predominantly people of color, banks did not loan money to people in those areas. So people didn't own their own homes. They were really kind of relegated to certain places that they can live and couldn't live. And it was really just, you can really see it, because one of the things we used to do when I was growing up is we would get on our bikes and we would say, hey, let's go to the white neighborhood today. And it was a particular reason, because those neighborhoods looked so different than ours. I mean, they had nice, clean yards, and the streets were all repaired, and you can hear the birds chirping. It was all friendly and nice. And you go back to our neighborhoods, and what you hear is, in background noise, there's gunshots and cars screeching and all kind of nonsense. So the whole point being that, redlining forced communities of color to be in certain areas. And in those areas, because there was not loans and cash flowing in those areas, and people didn't own their own homes, there was not a lot of money for good schools and good roads and solid infrastructure and programs to help people advance in society, because they were being held down in a certain area. So that's kind of what I remember growing up. But it wasn't, I didn't know it as a kid growing up. I learned about the impact on me growing up, because I learned about what redlining was. And that is one example of systemic racism.
Sure. And redlining has such an impact on so many areas, including education and others. But yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Egby. You wanted to add something?
I think that was an excellent definition. I would just add that systemic racism, it limits the opportunities of people of color. It limits their dignity. That's why it's something important to recognize. And it's also based on the argument or the perpetuation of systemic racism. What I always hear the argument is that the reason why things are the way they are is because of a particular individual's behavior. And that isn't always so. You can pull a firearm out on a certain individual because you see them, and just because they're running down the street, taking a jog, you look at them and they appear aggressive. And so those are questions that you have to ask yourself. Well, why is it that an African American running down the street in a majority Caucasian area considered aggressive versus a Caucasian person that lives in that particular area? You have to ask yourself that, and it goes back to systemic racism, police profiling, how they're taught, what is considered aggressive versus not. And that's all part of policies that are either ill-informed or blatantly racist.
Okay, great. Crystal, are you good, or you have something to add here?
Oh, I'd like to add a couple of thoughts, and obviously I have a very different perspective, and my experiences are different. And I'm so honored that you are sharing your experiences, because what you shared are not things that I would have experienced, or and seeing it through your stories has been really helps me grow as an individual. But one of the big things for me that I have seen over time, and I think the redlining is a great example of that. And Marcos, you mentioned that creates other challenges, is access to education. When you look at those communities where property taxes impact the school system, and that's how they pay for the school, it just implicitly has an impact on the school districts and the school systems to be able to provide education educational opportunities to the residents of those communities. And that just starts it out of the gate for young people. And so it's that's another area from a systemic standpoint that I personally have a passion for. And I'll just share my background. My father grew up in poverty. He's white. He grew up in Minnesota, and he joined the military. That was the way that they that's the way he knew to help himself grow. My mother is Korean. He married her while he was traveling. And so my experiences are different, but my children, as I think about systemic and unconscious bias, one of my children is very Asian looking, and my other one has hazel eyes and blonde hair. And seeing over the years the way they're treated differently, even though biologically they're the same. It goes back to the unconscious bias too, in addition to the systemic. And when you layer those two things on top of each other, it really does create a difficult situation for people to be able to overcome.
That's great. I think going back to the concept that, the whole issue of systemic racism is very complex, but also is something that is experienced.
Yes.
And that's why these conversations are so important, because we have to go there, talk to each other about it. So since it's something that is experienced, I have to hear it from you. You have to hear it from me, so we can really come to an understanding of what it's all about. So right now, we're going to take a brief 3-minute break intermission. And as our audience might have some patients to go see, or meetings or communications to answer to. So please come back, as the best is yet to come.